1889 and finished in 1791. And finally, I will briefly, if I have time, draw some lessons for constitution makers in the future, what to do and what not to do, with all due modesty. So, first, what constitutions are. And I think the simplest approach is to distinguish them from statutes, that is, from ordinary legislation. And constitutional clauses or constitutions and statutes differ along four different dimensions. First, constitutions regulate more fundamental matters than statutes. Second, constitutions regulate the creation of statutes, that is, how they are adopted. Third, constitutions have a priority of statutes in case they conflict. And finally, constitutions are more difficult to change than statutes. Statutes typically are changed by simple majority. Constitutions require more. So let me first comment on the first point. It might seem obvious that constitutions should regulate fundamental matters and statutes less fundamental matters, and by and large this is also what we observe. So constitutions regulate the functioning of the executive, legislative and judicial powers. It regulates the separation of these powers and the system of checks and balances among them. Constitutions also usually today contain a Bill of Rights, or a set of rights that protect individuals and their rights from arbitrary governmental intervention. So these are respectively the machinery of government and the Bill of Rights. Then thirdly, constitutions usually contain a clause about how they can be amended, and sometimes clauses about how they can be suspended in an emergency. One might think that elections in democracies are very fundamental, and therefore that electoral laws should be included in the Constitution. Surprisingly, this is rarely the case. It's a puzzle why constitution makers rarely include detailed specification of electoral laws into the document. I will get back to that question later. But constitutions also contain sometimes clauses that are not at all fundamental. Let me just give a couple of trivial examples. The Brazilian constitution regulates legal actions related to sport offenses. So, for instance, if a soccer player commits some kind of criminal offense, the Constitution tells you what to do about it. And the Austrian Constitution regulates the quorum for school board meetings. That is, how many of the members of the school board has to be present for the board to be able to make valid decisions. And so I could go on like this. Many more examples of constitutions that one, lack, do not regulate fundamental matters, and two, do regulate non-fundamental matters. But by and large, this is a valid generalization. Constitutions regulate fundamental, perhaps the foremost constitutional theories of the 20th century, that constitutions regulate the creation of statutes. But in practice, this does not make much of a difference for how politics works. It's a purely conceptual argument. The third point is very important. Obviously, if it should happen that a parliament adopts a law or the executive issues a decree that contradicts the constitution, then the constitution should have priority. In practice, however, this creates big problems because, first, it's not always obvious what is a contradiction when a law or a decree is in contradiction with the constitution. And second, who is to decide whether there is a contradiction? Neither the American Constitution of 1787 nor the French Constitution of 1789 addresses this question. They don't create a special organ whose task and function it is to scrutinize the constitutionality of laws. Today, of course, virtually all democracies have either constitutional courts or supreme courts which have this function of judicial review. But that was a very long process. In France, effective judicial review did not exist before 1974, because the French traditionally were very skeptical towards the government by judges. And finally, and this is perhaps even more crucial, constitutions are more difficult to change than ordinary statutes. A moment's reflection tells you that this had to be the case. For suppose the constitution could just be changed by 51% majority vote in Parliament. And suppose Parliament adopted a law that was unconstitutional. Then Parliament could just change the constitution and make the law constitutional, and then adopt the law. So then, in that case, the constitution would have no function. So to have any kind of causal efficacy, it's clear that the constitution must be more difficult to change than ordinary statutes are.